Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm really happy to be welcoming Richard Rosser. Rich has a really simple tagline. He says, I help ex-consultants and finance professionals to build careers they love. That's it. He's the founder of the aptly named Movemeon and another company, Payspective, which has already made its exit by merger with Figures, which is a pay benchmarking app. He's a really good exponent of working from home, and he has a degree in PPE from Oxford. Rich, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Claire. Lovely to be here. And obviously, we've been connected for ages, so it's nice to be chatting in a way that other people can hear us.
Indeed. Let's start with your career journey, as we always do. You've been through a few pivots and changes in your career, starting at McKinsey on graduation, where you spent a few years. But in your case, the entrepreneurial bug hit you quite early, and you created Movemeon almost 12 years ago. Tell us how your career unfolded, and talk particularly about how much it was by design and how much serendipity played a role. And then if you could show us some of your key moments of pride or achievements, and perhaps talk about the darker side, the challenging moments and the things you might be less proud of.
I was at Oxford. I went to various careers fairs. I think anybody who was, at university in the early 2000s when I was there would have been trotting around these things. And I kind of fell into consulting because I wanted to move to London. I thought the travel sounded cool. And I wanted to keep my options open. I was scared to commit to anything too specific. And consulting was pitched as this, hey, come learn some great general skills, travel the world, meet some interesting people, build a network. So I went and did that. And do you know what? It was exactly that. And I wouldn't have done anything differently. I had 3 great years there and it ticked all the boxes for me. But I always knew that my DNA was more doing. As an example, like when I was a teenager, I set up a gardening business, like where I lived, and I cut hedges, and then I had too many hedges to cut, so I roped in my friends to cut hedges with me, and I always got a buzz from making stuff happen, and I felt consulting was just a little bit too removed for me. You're kind of the person giving the recommendations, and I wanted to be the person who took the recommendations and ticked them off the to-do list. So like many people, or the vast majority of people who spend some time in consulting, I decided to leave, and McKinsey at the time, very much encouraged that at my level. And I thought, hey, like what better stage than now than to start a business? To answer on your questions around key moments, like I think I was quite perceptive at that stage. I was 25. And I thought, look, I've got no real financial commitments, right? I don't have a mortgage. I don't have children, no responsibilities. So I can take a financial risk at this point. Like I can't kind of eat beans on toast and make do. So I think that was a good move. I also found a great co-founder, which is another thing I'm so grateful of. Starting businesses is hard. You need incredible resilience. And I would have stopped many times over without kind of having Nick there to be partners in crime. So long story short, we sat in a pub. It's sadly closed down. We I know, like many pubs in the UK, but this one I think is now a bold new office building. So sat in the pub and we literally brainstormed out ideas on a beer mat. And we came up with all these businesses that have since been founded. And I think we came up with Airbnb. I think we came up with Uber. But actually, what was really important to us, Claire, was we wanted to build a business that we could identify with and that solved a problem that we were like really familiar with. And secondly, we wanted to build a business where we were building the product, selling it, growing it, doing the marketing. Specifically, we didn't want to build a business that required us to go out and immediately raise capital, right? And I'm not saying that's a bad route, it's just a different route. And a lot of our friends did do that and raise venture capital rounds. It's just the nature of what you do if you choose that path is different, right? You're suddenly keeping investors happy, raising more money, and you're not quite at the coalface so much of the time as maybe we wanted to be. So we said, hey, we are at a point in our career where discovering opportunities is really frustrating, right? You kind of had headhunters on the one side and you had LinkedIn on the other, and headhunters are all about the cold call and the coffee. And I'm working with a leading employer that often ends up not to be so leading. LinkedIn was this trawling experience and sort of very, very time consuming and never quite finding things that were the right fit. So we were like, hey, that's a problem for us. Let's chat to some employers and see if it's a problem for them. And it was. So we just went at it, right? And just over 10 years on, we have grown that internationally, have set up a couple of businesses, as you've alluded to, along the side and in the same space, and kind of never looked back from that moment. So that's my kind of potted history of the career. The other thing is I'm a family man now with 3 kids, and I think one should never talk about career without talking about life, right? So
It's
been important to me that building the business, growing the business has also not compromised my time with family, my life as a dad, my wife's career as well. So for instance, I work 4 days a week, and I always have done since we had our first child 9 years ago. So there's definitely been some tactics around starting the business at a time when I felt lower risk, but it's always nice to talk, I think, about the whole rather than just the work side.
Beautiful. And I'm thinking that, as you mentioned, tactics, if we think about strategy as well, I'm wondering what lessons did you learn at McKinsey that have served you particularly well in your founder's journey, and what has been as, if not more, useful since that time?
McKinsey was great for training. It really was. And actually, I was coaching someone yesterday who was considering going to BCG, so McKinsey competitor, and he was asking me about pros and cons. And I said, look, and he'd never really had any formal training in his career. He'd sort of been into a few roles, and a lot of them in startups and scale-ups. And I said, look, one thing you'll really get out of a couple of years at BCG is some really, really solid training. There's stuff I learned at McKinsey that I still use every day. I think the main thing that consulting really teaches you is to break down problems and opportunities in a very, very structured way. There's all sorts of frameworks you can use it. When I interview founders, one of the questions I ask is, what skill that you learn consulting do you still use every day, and do you think stands you apart? And the one that is mentioned most is that ability just to create a bit of order from chaos, to be able to cut through the noise to like what really matters. So I think where that's applicable in startups is, you are hugely resource constrained, right? So when we started this business, it was me and Nick, and we were, everything from IT support to finance to sales to product and marketing. So, and there's 24 hours in a day, and you kind of want to spend some of them with friends and family. So I think consulting really helped us just to prioritize, to focus on like the route to progress, to cut through the stuff that was actually nice to have. So that's probably been the one skill that I think consulting really teaches you that potentially other careers just don't. I think other careers teach you very well in hard skills like building financial models, right, or social media marketing. But this overall structuring problems and opportunities and working out the route through, it is something I really look back on fondly and use all the time.
Think about the skills and the mindsets that you brought and those that you've had to develop since, and draw some contrasts and comparisons there.
The one thing that consulting isn't great at is fostering like really rapid execution, right? Getting things done quickly that are kind of good enough. You get them out there, you gauge reaction, and I always then say, look, you gauge reaction, and you stop it, you tweak it, or you keep it as it is. Very rarely is it perfect first time.
Yeah.
But consulting is an environment where you have a client paying you a lot of money. There's an expectation around the perfect answer and giving people the answer. You have a bit more time and resources to really kind of analyze everything and be sure of your answer first. And starting a business isn't like that. You need to get stuff out there, be vulnerable. It's as much about just getting stuff done quickly and perfectly. So that's something I've definitely had to learn. I think learning to listen is an interesting one. So when you're a junior consultant, I think much more senior consultants learn this as they go. Again, you feel this slight pressure to come with the answers, right? The client is paying for answers. So it's very easy to sort of, speak first and listen never. I've learned to listen much more actively, particularly to users. That's one thing I would stress. I think we all listen to team members. We work with people day in, day out. We collaborate. Listening to your users is often overlooked or underserved, right? The people that are using your product or service, ours is a marketplace. So we have candidates, if you like, looking for jobs and looking for advice, and then employers who are looking to hire them, and then us giving the advice. That's where the intel lies. So finding really simple ways to regularly listen to your users and react to what they're saying is something I've definitely learned. And I think consulting doesn't naturally maybe encourage that as much as it might, particularly in the early years.
Absolutely. And I think we can probably agree that the whole world would be a better place if people did more listening and less talking first. But let's not go too far down that particular rabbit hole. Let's talk about very early careers. You made the choice that you made. You've had your personal learning, therefore. And of course, you have the massive privilege of having seen thousands and thousands of career changes at critical moments in their lives. What advice do you have for somebody graduating next year from university or coming into their first significant career choice?
I actually had this experience with my brother, who is 6 years younger than me. And I had just about started Movemeon when he was in his final year at university. The main piece of advice I would give people is don't worry about starting your career in some sort of perfect way. Like, I almost wouldn't have a plan, right? Because careers evolve, and the way they evolve is by doing something, and then you learn about yourself, you learn from others, you build a network, you can plan to make things happen out of chance. But I wouldn't be overly worried about trying to plan this path. What I would really focus on is getting a job, right? When my brother was graduating, I just said, look, well, the most important thing is just get yourself a job, get yourself busy, get yourself into a grad scheme or whatever it might be, because that's where you'll start to learn about yourself and your strengths and all that sort of stuff. So that would be my main advice. Don't overly worry about it. You're going to learn through doing and through having those experiences. Later down the line, career transitions, we can talk about more. The insight into what you are good at, what your natural strengths are, what you enjoy, and how to kind of combine that with your career progression, becomes more obvious because you've spent time in work. But in the very, very early years, I would just get a job. I really encourage things like internships. Volunteering is another great way just to understand the things you like to spend time doing in the workplace.
Absolutely. Even gardening businesses when you're 16, they absolutely shape what you love and don't love, don't they?
You learn how to manage clients, you learn how to sell.
People often poo-poo the sort of working in a restaurant or whatever, but it all absolutely builds skills and mindsets that are crucial, even if you go on to be the CEO of the biggest company in the world.
Most people learn through doing.
Yes.
Right. So I'm always a big advocate of put yourself out there, get stuck in. Doesn't really matter what it is, you'll learn through doing.
Totally. That said, as careers go on, there are then different types of choices to be made based on some experience, some sense, some ambition, whatever it might be. And you wrote an article a little while ago about how you encourage each of your clients, whether they be ex-consultants or future ex-consultants, to describe their plan A, their vision, as it were. And you observed that you yourself hadn't been following that advice particularly well. And you've recently been working with a coach on reshaping those plans and visions that you had been making. What advice do you have for people making their plan A at a crucial time in their career? And how has working with a coach helped you personally to get more clarity?
In consulting, most people have a very natural point at which this applies, and that's when they're thinking about leaving. So consulting, most people do leave because the model is a pyramid.
Absolutely.
It has to get narrow at the top.
Mhm.
And then a lot of people, for various reasons, travel, work-life balance, etc., opt to leave anyway, right? So when you talk about people who seek my advice, what I try and do in a very scalable way through my content, through my YouTube, etc., is help people to make more informed decisions. So the advice I give people is normally to sit on the sofa with a glass of their favorite tipple and do a bit of like introspection. Questions that people find useful are, what do you really enjoy doing? And by that question, I mean, what is that thing where you look up from your laptop or whatever it might be, and you're like, oh my gosh, like 4 hours has flown by. You just totally lost yourself, right? And for some people, that's crunching numbers. It doesn't really matter what it is, but if you can identify those things that give you energy, right? They're not draining. It's like, oh, I had to slog through that, but at least it's done now. It's like, wow, I actually feel great coming off, and that, it was 4 hours. Then I think that's the secret sauce, right? It's being very honest with yourself around what gives you energy. Then it's about saying, well, okay, I've worked out what gives me energy, and there could be a little bit more around environments that give you energy or types of people that give you energy, right? So there's a few different lenses to look through. Then it's about saying, well, where does this exist in the world of work? I encourage people to think functionally, right? So if you love speaking to people, then you probably would suit a sales type role, a client-facing business development type role, or maybe a consumer research type role. Whereas if you like, crunching numbers, then maybe you need to go into private equity and do deal valuations, whatever. So you can typically align what gives you energy with a type of job. Yep. And then you can say, well, given it's that type of job, where does the volume of those types of job exist, right? So people always look at me like I'm slightly mad when I say this, because in my experience, people tend to think about their career in terms of industry, and particularly in consulting, they say, okay, well, I'm thinking because I've done a lot of work for retailers, I should go and work in retail. And I sort of say, okay, well, when you've done your work for retailers, like when you've been doing those projects, what are the things you spent time on that you enjoyed the most? And they say, okay, well, it's actually like getting to insight from the numbers. And I say, okay, well, it sounds like you need to go and join an insights function. And that could be in any industry.
Indeed.
Right? So I think it's important to flip it on its head a bit. In terms of working with a coach and my own journey on this, I think it's very easy to forget to check back in on yourself and on your own plan. So what I encourage people to do is, once a year, maybe you can just have a day where you do this, right? Your tipple on the sofa day or walk with your better half or whatever, is just go, okay, right. I said I wanted to put myself in a place that gives me energy. I made this move a year ago. Like, am I still feeling that? Is this delivering? If it's not, then you say, well, have I been open with my boss about like where I'm at my best and what gives me strengths? Is there anything I can change in my role? Can they change something in the role? Is it a total disaster? I need to be looking elsewhere. So, I would just encourage people at a very simple level to have a sort of an annual routine where you bother to do a conscious check-in and then make a bit of an action plan. Because all of this can be controlled and adjusted, but it normally takes a bit of a conscious effort to do it.
Consciousness, mindfulness, being aware. It's the key to pretty much everything, isn't it?
But hard to do when you're busy, right? You're busy at work, busy with kids,
far too easy to forget.
Very easy not to carve out the time to do that. But that kind of introspection, I really encourage people do a big load of it where you feel like you're making that pivot out of consulting as a classic, but then continue to do it.
Yes, and of course the routine of using journaling or meditation or whatever it might be daily isn't just in order to be woo-woo. It's if you are sort of reflecting and storing the fruit of those reflections in small pieces over time, it's less intimidating actually to do the full day-long audit or whatever it might be. But yes, great advice. Thank you. You're a really avid poster on LinkedIn, and your content shows up in various formats, lots of brilliant surveys, videos, information, observations. I'm wondering how you managed to run all of this and a business, indeed more than one business, and what recommendations do you have for our listeners about how to get the most out of their own social media platforms?
Interestingly, Claire, until about 9 months ago, I barely posted on LinkedIn at all.
I know, that's why I asked you the question.
If people are listening into this and thinking, oh my gosh, I am not a social media influencer, and this guy's some sort of new age influencer who I can't relate to, I'm really not.
Yeah.
So what happened here was about 12 months ago, maybe 10 months ago, a few people at the same time said to me stuff along the lines of, Rich, like that was really helpful. And I'm kind of wondering if you share that with other people. And it kind of, working with a coach at the same time, it dawned on me that I had become an expert. And in my own mind, I hadn't realized that, I am probably the world's #1 guru on transitioning careers out of consulting, right? I know it's a niche, but like the perfect exit consulting is my niche. And I hadn't quite realized that I was an expert in that to the degree, our platform, Movemeon, has supported over 5,000 organizations to make this type of hire, right? And if you look at, we're not a recruitment agency, but our kind of the headhunters who we felt that sort of candidate experience wasn't ideal for us, they might work with a few handfuls of customers. So I had this weird overview of how employers think about the consulting and the ex-consulting skill set. And I just hadn't realized that what was obvious to me was because I've become a bit of an expert and maybe wasn't obvious to everybody else. And I was sort of saying these things in these conversations with people because people would pick my brain and they were just kind of obvious. And people would go, oh, that's really, really helpful. I was like, really? Like, it's just kind of obvious, right? Anyway, so long story short, I just started posting. And I am not spending like loads of hours a week. I probably spend 45 minutes a week. I try and post once a day, about 4 days a week at the moment. And I try and share stuff that is helpful advice. That's my kind of modus operandi. I don't do stuff for like clickbait. I know you see a lot of people kind of posting stuff which encourages that reach through clickbait. I just try and share perspectives from interesting conversations I've had, or somebody's asked me a question on message and I say, well, this is the answer I gave, so I share it more broadly. I just try and get my perspective and my experience out there for the benefit of others, and I really enjoy doing it. I should probably be more systematic about it. We might get onto things in the future for me in the business, but I'd encourage anybody who is getting to a point in their career where they feel like they've got expertise to share, just to do it. Worst thing that happens is nobody reads your stuff. But what do they say? Nobody ever forgets the bad songs on an album. They tend to disappear into obscurity and never get played on Spotify. So like I've enjoyed just putting myself out there and not getting too worried if lots of people react to it or not.
You've been brilliant. And I loved watching your transition into video posts, which you were obviously nervous about, but of course you did them brilliantly because you did them as yourself and didn't try to be anything other than Rich sharing his expertise, which, as you say, is unique. And it's once you step away from the sort of either the FOMO or the imposter syndrome, then all you're doing is sharing a little nugget of something, right, that somebody might find useful. And some of them do fall into a black hole, don't they? And take off in ways you couldn't imagine.
And don't get me wrong, there's many people who have made their millions out of being a social media influencer and do it in a very commercial way. But, that's not my objective. And I encourage people to listen to this. My objective is actually not to have a big social media presence. It's just to share my insight in the hope that it will be helpful to people. And weirdly through that, I've now got 35,000 followers on LinkedIn and all that sort of good stuff. But it's not the reason to do it. and I'd encourage people just to give it a go.
Well, of course, you have bread and butter in your business, which is career transitions out of consulting and financial services. How would you describe the ideal transition out of consulting and into something else? What are the potential barriers and traps beyond the allusions we've already made to learning to listen more or things like that?
There's probably two parts to this question for me, Claire. So I'll try and break it down into how to think about making a good transition, and then after you've left for whatever you're doing, how to make a good start, maybe. So as you alluded to, one of the things I do on LinkedIn is I do surveys, polls, right? I do one every couple of weeks. And some of the results really shock me. One of them, people can go check out my profile, just go to Richard Rosser and you'll find my various polls on LinkedIn. One of them was basically along the lines of, like, when you left consulting, how planned was it? And the options were, no plan at all, kind of reacted to a role that came across my desk, gave it a month's thought, and then up to, planned it for 6 months. Anyway, I was kind of thinking that it would be relatively even spread. So 25%, I think there were 4 options, right? It was not. 80% of people left with less than 1 month's plan. So this is a reaction to an emotional or way they were feeling about their work at the time. So consulting is famously hard on work-life balance, very long hours, lots of travel. And the picture this painted was people were just fed up, straw that broke the camel's back, and they just leave for whatever happens to be, the headhunter got in touch, said, I've got this great job, and they've gone, yeah, give it to me, right? Another story I'll share, a little anecdote. Somebody I connected with in the US, who is a chief strategy officer, talked about leaving, I think it was Bain, it was one of the MBB companies. And I said, oh, talk to me about that exit. And he said, well, the Bain office where I was directly opposite the office of this company. And there was a coffee cart outside of our offices. And I went down to the coffee cart, and the guy next to me in the queue worked at this company and said something along the lines of, I'm pretty sure we're hiring for a few roles right now. So I joined that company. Anyway, he then went on to say, biggest mistake he'd ever made, and, wish he hadn't. And it'd taken, quite a few years to unpick that career decision. The point was, reacted to something that was on the table. So my overall advice around making that exit from consulting is be more planned, right? So be proactive, do that introspection. What am I enjoying? Like, what am I trying to get out in the next 6 months here? Speak to people who have left with no agenda. Like, don't get to the point where you're desperate to leave before you start exploring, reading, insights that maybe I create or other people in this sphere. So just start to gently form that picture of, do I think I'm going to leave? If so, explore, talk to people, get a sense of that introspection, where you're strong. So when you do leave, it feels like a really controlled, informed decision. And consulting's strange. You can literally go in any direction you want, right? You can functionally move in a number of directions. You could work for a small startup up to the biggest global corporation, private equity, venture capital, smaller consulting firm. You could work for yourself as freelance. The options are endless.
Yeah.
So it takes time to form a really good plan. So give yourself time. After you've left, the biggest mistake I see consultants make is wanting to make an impact on day one, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's bred into consultants. You've got short projects, clients paying a lot of money, they're very intense, and there's this need to, the need for speed, right? It's kind of deliver day one answer. We even had at McKinsey, like, what's the day one answer? It's like, you've literally just got into the client's building, you barely can remember their names, and what's the answer, right? So that is a really good way to piss people off, in my experience, particularly if you're going into a business where you've probably got people who've been there for 30 years. So what I would say is, if you're leaving consulting, or in fact any role for a new role, take your time, pace yourself, listen, diagnose, wait, right? Just slow down that entry so you really understand, the business, the industry, the politics, right? big businesses have a lot of politics, the people, the stakeholders, the power, the reporting, how you can influence, etc. So yeah, if I was to single out one thing on making a good exit, it would be give yourself time. One thing on making a good start in any new role, it would be take your time, listen, understand, diagnose.
Okay, listeners, if you have got anything that you want to be inclined to take away, there are 3 words here: take your time. And they apply particularly here, but more or less anywhere. So thank you. What would you like to see organizations doing better when it comes to talent and career management? Obviously, you deal with a lot. You've mentioned the number 5,000. That's incredibly impressive. What sort of great examples of companies do you see doing really good work in career and talent management?
My most obvious thing to talk about is hiring. Our expertise are, helping organizations hire better, right? I would say the one single biggest thing I would want to change is hiring based on skill set, not based on where someone's worked or whether they've done that job before. Now, there was a really interesting piece of research by an organization called the Chemistry Group, and they basically tracked why someone was hired with how well that person performed in the role after they joined the business, and they tracked it over a number of years. And it was interesting. So, and they built a hierarchy of kind of most important to least important. And I think I'm pretty right in saying that experience, i.e., have done this job before, let's say at a competitor, was the least correlated with high performance. Now, that's worth pausing on, because most organizations, when they go to hire, let's say you're going to hire a, finance manager in your credit control department, the criteria that the recruiter will go to market with will be, we probably want to hire someone who's done that job before. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some jobs that are very technical, some jobs that require a huge amount of industry expertise where that might apply more. But what I'd encourage hiring managers to do is go, like, what are the skills that underpin doing this job really well, right? And that could be, they need to be naturally analytical. They need to be great at managing and communicating with stakeholders and people. So what are the skills that really underpin that? And then form your whole CV screening and interview process around those skills. Because the right person for you might be coming from consulting, they might not be, right? That opens you up to a much more diverse candidate pool, which I think is really, really important. But fundamentally, it helps you hire people who are more likely to be high performing in those roles. So yeah, what I'd love to see is more and more organizations, and there are organizations that do this very well, really zooming in on just the skills that underpin doing that job well. Now, feels risky to someone because you might actually hire someone who's never done the job before, but you have to trust that if the skills are right and you've interviewed well for the skills, then they're going to learn that job fast and be a better high performer in the long run. So that's something I would love to encourage people to do more and more of. The other one I might mention is the importance of really good onboarding. I put probation periods into this. The number of organizations who will get to the end of a probation period and kind of go, has this person passed probation, and sort of not really know, is shocking. So setting people up for success with great onboarding just helps them do a really good job, feel settled, but fundamentally add value faster. So things like being really, really clear about their role and their responsibilities, being crystal clear about what good performance looks like, doing a really good kind of kickoff around how they like to work, how you like to work, and kind of all that solid team kickoff or direct report kickoff, putting in some milestone meetings, asking them, like, how do you like to work and how can I make you successful? All these sorts of things allow someone to perform better. Like, be clear to be kind, I think is a really good phrase to have in mind here. So yeah, I think too many companies kind of stop at the hiring. When they've got the offer accepted, they're like, great, X is joining. Going the extra mile around thoughtful onboarding and setting that person up to be successful quickly, it really does pay dividends.
Beautiful. Terribly important. And you're preaching to the choir with regard to hiring away from laundry lists of similar experience in exactly the same sort of context. So reminder to the listeners, but we're on board with that. You've got some pretty exciting projects coming up. You're launching and creating impact in areas of your business that weren't there a little while ago. Share with us some of those pieces of news and what's going to be occupying and preoccupying you for the rest of the year.
When we started Movemeon, the insight was that there must be a better way to do hiring than the recruitment agency experience that we faced. And there must be a more engaging experience for candidates to discover that insight and advice around careers and discover unique opportunities. So we kicked that off within consulting and formal consulting, and we've always had the vision that it would apply to other professional niches. So we've started to roll it out into finance. So that's a big project and exciting thing we're working on right now. So anybody, let's say, with a background in the Big Four who's done an ACA or a CFA will start to find Movemeon as relevant from an advice and also from a job opportunities point of view as people from consulting. We're also expanding in the United States. So we have hired our first team members out there. We've always had a very strong organic business in the States, a lot of clients hiring, a lot of professionals using the platform. We just felt it was the time was right to build a local team who can really scale up our experience. So kind of supporting that growth geographically and replicating our reach that we already have in Europe and the Middle East and Asia Pacific. And then the thing at the end of my list, that will maybe segue into next year, is building more of an offering around the career guidance and advice that I'm very passionate about, helping people make that more informed transition or decision. So at the moment, I obviously put content out there. I have done recently quite a few one-on-one coaching type conversations, trying to unpick where people find the most value in what I have tactically to offer versus, let's say, a career coach. And I'll be developing a digital offering that people will be able to access in this space. Unfortunately, I can't scale my time, but what I can do is put together things that people can use on a self-service learning point of view, and hopefully, benefit from my experience having worked with those 5,000 organizations and all the people who have made that transition successfully over the years. So that bit I'm super excited about because it allows me, I guess, the next stage in this journey of having started to get content out there on LinkedIn to realizing that actually, people are finding it helpful and valuable, and trying to make that a little bit more systematic and how people can discover it and benefit from it.
Those sound like incredibly exciting developments. Rich, we could go on, I know, all evening, but we won't. We're going to call a day to it here and let you get back to making all these things happen.
Well, it's 10 to 6, so I'm going to have 3 kids running through the door from school. So,
it's all part of the
things
picture,
will have to,
right? Yeah.
have to wait till tomorrow.
So much. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I know the audience is going to love this. We'll make sure that we make as many references as possible to the different resources you've mentioned. And thank you very much once again for being here.
Pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.